Princess Elena stood at her bedroom window, watching the morning mist rise from the royal gardens. Her heart felt heavy, like a stone had settled in her chest. Today would change everything, though nobody in the palace knew it yet. The Rosewood Palace had been her home for 23 years, but it had never felt more like a prison than it did now. The golden walls that once seemed warm and welcoming now felt cold and distant. Even the beautiful paintings that hung in every corridor seemed to mock her with their perfect frozen smiles. Elena touched the letter hidden in her dress pocket. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. Inside were words that could destroy her family's reputation and shake the very foundations of the kingdom. But they were also words of love, written by the only person who had ever truly understood her heart. Captain Marcus Rivera had served in the Royal Guard for 5 years. He was not born into nobility like the men her father, King Charles, wanted her to marry. Marcus came from a simple farming family in the northern provinces. His hands were rough from years of sword training and hard work. His clothes were always perfectly clean and pressed, but they were the plain blue uniform of a guard, not the silk and velvet of a prince. Elena remembered the first time she really noticed him. It was during the Harvest Festival 2 years ago. She had been walking through the market square, surrounded by her usual group of ladies-in-waiting and guards, when a small child ran directly into her path. The little girl was crying, having lost her mother in the crowd. While Elena's ladies-in-waiting stepped back in alarm, worried about the child's dirty clothes touching the princess's expensive dress, Marcus immediately knelt down to the child's level. He spoke to her in a gentle voice, asking her name and what her mother looked like. Within minutes, he had reunited the child with her frantic mother. Elena watched the whole scene unfold. She saw how Marcus's face lit up when the little girl stopped crying. She noticed how he refused the mother's offer of a small coin as thanks, saying that helping people was just part of his job. Most importantly, she saw how he treated the common people with the same respect he showed to royalty. That night, Elena found herself thinking about the young captain instead of the boring prince from a neighboring kingdom who had been trying to court her all week. Over the following months, Elena began to notice Marcus everywhere. He was always professional, always respectful, but she started to see small signs that maybe he noticed her too. When she walked past him in the corridors, she caught him watching her with a look that seemed deeper than mere duty. During formal events, when other guards would look straight ahead, Marcus would sometimes glance her way, and their eyes would meet for just a moment before he looked away. The first time they spoke privately was 6 months later. Elena had been feeling suffocated by palace life and had snuck out to the royal gardens late at night. She thought she was alone until she heard footsteps behind her. "Your Highness, you shouldn't be out here alone," Marcus said, stepping out from behind a large oak tree. Elena spun around, her heart racing. "Captain Rivera, I didn't know you were on night watch." "I'm not," he said simply. "I saw you leave the palace and was concerned for your safety." They stood there in the moonlight looking at each other. Elena felt something she had never experienced before, a connection that seemed to spark in the air between them. "I needed some fresh air," she explained. "Sometimes the palace feels so small." Marcus nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. "I imagine it must be difficult, always being watched, always having people expect things from you." Elena was surprised. No one had ever acknowledged the burden she felt. Her parents, her tutors, her ladies-in-waiting, they all saw her life as privileged and perfect. Marcus was the first person to recognize that being a princess came with its own kind of loneliness. They began to meet secretly in the gardens, always late at night when the rest of the palace was asleep. At first, they just talked. Marcus told her stories about growing up on his family's farm, about his younger sister who wanted to become a teacher, about the books he read in his spare time. Elena shared her dreams of traveling to other kingdoms, of seeing how common people lived, of doing something meaningful with her life beyond just marrying a prince and producing heirs. These conversations continued for months. Elena found herself looking forward to their midnight meetings more than anything else in her life. Marcus made her laugh with stories about clumsy new guards and palace gossip. He listened when she complained about boring diplomatic dinners and impossible marriage arrangements. Most importantly, he saw her as Elena, not just as Your Highness. The night everything changed was 3 months ago. It had been raining, and they had taken shelter in the old greenhouse at the far end of the gardens. They were sitting close together on a stone bench trying to stay warm when Elena realized Marcus was staring at her. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," Marcus said, "about how different things could be." "Different how?" "If I were a prince, or if you were born a commoner, if we could just be two people who cared about each other, without all these complications." Elena's heart stopped. "You care about me?" Marcus looked away, suddenly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I shouldn't have said that. It was inappropriate." But Elena reached out and touched his hand. "Don't be sorry. I care about you too." The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Then Marcus looked back at her, and Elena saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, nothing like the aggressive advances she had received from various princes and nobles. From that night on, their relationship deepened into something neither of them could deny. They were in love, completely and hopelessly in love, despite the impossible situation. But they weren't the only ones who spent time in the palace gardens at night. Lady Victoria Ashford, the king's consort, had her own reasons for wandering the grounds after dark. Victoria was a beautiful woman of 35, with golden hair and sharp blue eyes. She had been the king's companion for 3 years, ever since Queen Isabella had died of a fever. Victoria's position in the palace was complicated. She wasn't the queen, but she had more influence than anyone except the king himself. She lived in rooms almost as grand as the royal families, wore jewels that rivaled Elena's own, and was invited to every important event. But she would never be truly secure unless she could convince the king to marry her. The problem was Elena. As long as the princess remained unmarried, King Charles felt no pressure to remarry himself. He was content to let Victoria remain his consort indefinitely. But if Elena married well, producing a strong alliance for the kingdom, the king might feel it was time to make his own position more official. Victoria had been working for months to push Elena toward marriage with Prince David of the neighboring kingdom of Westmarch. David was handsome, wealthy, and politically advantageous. More importantly, from Victoria's perspective, he lived far enough away that Elena would have to leave Rosewood Palace permanently after the wedding. But Elena had been resisting every attempt at matchmaking, claiming she wasn't ready for marriage. This frustrated Victoria, who couldn't understand why any girl would turn down a prince. She had begun to suspect that Elena was being influenced by someone, but she couldn't figure out who. The answer came to her by accident one night in early spring. Victoria had been returning from a secret meeting with Prince David's ambassador, discussing wedding arrangements without Elena's knowledge, when she heard voices from the old greenhouse. Curious and always eager for palace gossip, she crept closer to investigate. What she saw through the dusty greenhouse windows changed everything. Elena and Marcus were sitting together on the stone bench, clearly comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of many previous meetings. Elena's head was resting on Marcus's shoulder, and he was stroking her hair while they talked quietly. Victoria watched in shock as Marcus lifted Elena's chin and kissed her softly. She saw the way Elena melted into the kiss, the way her hands came up to rest on Marcus's chest. This wasn't the awkward affection of a first romance. These two had been meeting like this for some time. Victoria's mind raced as she processed what she was seeing. The Princess of Rosewood, heir to one of the most powerful kingdoms in the region, was having a secret romance with a commoner. A guard, no less. The scandal would be enormous if it became public. King Charles would be humiliated. The alliance with Westmarch would be destroyed. The entire political balance of the region could shift. But Victoria also saw an opportunity. If she could expose Elena's relationship at exactly the right moment, the princess would be disgraced and possibly exiled. King Charles would be so embarrassed and angry that he would need Victoria's support more than ever. He might even marry her immediately to show the kingdom that he still commanded respect. Victoria crept away from the greenhouse with a smile on her face. She wouldn't reveal what she had seen right away. First, she would gather evidence. She would document every meeting, every kiss, every moment of affection between the princess and her guard. Then, when the time was right, she would destroy them both. Over the following weeks, Victoria became a shadow in the palace gardens. She followed Elena and Marcus, took note of their meeting times, and even managed to overhear some of their conversations. She learned that they were desperately in love, but both understood the impossibility of their situation. She heard Marcus talk about wanting to take Elena away from the palace life she hated. She heard Elena dream about giving up her title to be with him. Most importantly, Victoria discovered that the lovers were planning something. She couldn't hear all the details, but she caught enough words to understand that they were discussing some kind of farewell. Marcus mentioned leaving the kingdom, and Elena talked about difficult choices. Victoria realized they were planning to run away together. The thought filled her with both excitement and concern. If Elena disappeared with Marcus, it would certainly cause a massive scandal. But it would also mean Victoria couldn't control exactly when and how the revelation happened. She needed Elena to be caught in the act, preferably in front of witnesses who could spread the story throughout the palace. Victoria began to plan her own strategy. She would wait until she was certain Elena and Marcus were about to leave together, then she would arrange for them to be discovered at the perfect moment. She started recruiting allies among the palace staff, servants who were loyal to her, guards who resented Marcus's rapid promotion through the ranks, ladies-in-waiting who were jealous of Elena's beauty and status. Meanwhile, Elena and Marcus were indeed planning their escape, though they called it something else. They couldn't bear the thought of a lifetime apart, but they also couldn't continue their secret meetings forever. Eventually, someone would discover them, and the consequences would be terrible for both of them. Marcus had been offered a position with a merchant company that traded with distant kingdoms. It would mean leaving his post as a royal guard, but it would also mean steady work and the possibility of building a new life far from Rosewood Palace. He had initially planned to take the job alone, hoping that distance would help him forget his impossible love for the princess. But Elena had other ideas. "Take me with you," she had whispered during one of their midnight meetings. "Elena, you know I can't do that. You're a princess. You have responsibilities to your kingdom, to your people. What about my responsibility to myself? What about my right to choose my own happiness?" Marcus struggled with the decision for weeks. He loved Elena more than his own life, but he also understood the sacrifice she would be making. If she left with him, she would give up everything: her title, her inheritance, her family, her homeland. She would become just another commoner, facing all the hardships that came with that life. But Elena was determined. She had spent her entire life being told what to do, whom to marry, how to behave. For once she wanted to make her own choice, even if it was the hardest choice she would ever make. They decided that Marcus would accept the position with the merchant company and leave Rosewood in 2 weeks. Elena would follow 3 days later, claiming she was going on a religious retreat to a convent in the mountains. By the time anyone realized she wasn't at the convent, they would be far away, traveling under assumed names toward a new life in a kingdom where no one knew who Princess Elena had been. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it was their only chance for happiness. Elena began making careful preparations. She sold some of her jewelry to merchants in the town, claiming she wanted simpler pieces. She gradually moved her most precious possessions: letters from her late mother, a few favorite books, a locket that had belonged to her grandmother, to a hiding place in the old greenhouse. She also began saying subtle goodbyes to people she cared about, though she couldn't tell them what she was really doing. She spent extra time with her father's elderly advisor, Master Thomas, who had taught her history and literature since she was a child. She had long conversations with Mrs. Abigail, the head cook, who had always treated Elena like a beloved daughter rather than just a princess. Most painfully, she tried to prepare herself for leaving her father. King Charles wasn't a perfect parent, but he loved Elena in his own way. She knew her disappearance would break his heart and possibly destroy his faith in people. The guilt of that knowledge was almost enough to make her change her mind, but then she would see Marcus across a crowded room or catch his eye during a formal dinner, and she would remember why she was willing to give up everything. Love like theirs came once in a lifetime, if at all. She couldn't let fear or duty steal it from her. As the day of Marcus's departure approached, both lovers grew more nervous and excited. They were so focused on their plans and their stolen moments together that they failed to notice the watching eyes that followed their every move. Victoria had recruited more allies than she realized. Palace gossip traveled fast, and several people had begun to suspect something was happening between the princess and the handsome guard captain. Some were genuinely concerned about Elena's reputation. Others were simply eager to be part of a juicy scandal. The trap was set, though Elena and Marcus had no idea they were walking into it. 2 days before Marcus was scheduled to leave, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't bear the thought of him leaving without her, even for 3 days. The risk of something going wrong, of being discovered and separated forever, was too great. She sent him a message through a trusted servant. "Meet me in the greenhouse tonight. I'm coming with you tomorrow." Marcus received the message during afternoon training with the other guards. His hands shook as he read Elena's words. They had agreed that the safest plan was for him to leave first, but he understood her fear. 3 days apart would feel like 3 years when they were so close to their new life together. He sent back a simple reply: "I'll be waiting." That night would be their last in Rosewood Palace. By tomorrow evening, they would be on a ship headed for a distant kingdom, free to love each other openly for the first time. But Victoria was also reading messages that day. Her network of servants and supporters had been watching Elena carefully, and they had noticed the princess's strange behavior. The secret message to Marcus was intercepted and copied before it reached him. Victoria smiled as she read Elena's words. Tomorrow night would indeed be perfect, perfect for the dramatic confrontation that would destroy the princess and secure Victoria's own future as the next queen of Rosewood. Elena spent her last day in the palace trying to memorize everything she would miss. She walked through her favorite rooms, touched the walls of corridors she had run through as a child, and stood for a long time in front of the portrait of her mother that hung in the main hall. Queen Isabella had died when Elena was 16, but her daughter still remembered her gentle voice and kind eyes. Elena wondered what her mother would think of the choice she was making. Would she understand that love was worth any sacrifice? Or would she be disappointed in her daughter for abandoning her royal duties? Elena would never know the answer, but as she looked at her mother's painted face, she felt a sense of peace. Her mother had married for duty, not love, and though she had been a good queen, Elena had sometimes seen sadness in her eyes. Maybe Queen Isabella would have wanted her daughter to choose differently. As the sun set on what would be her last day as Princess Elena of Rosewood, the young woman felt ready to become simply Elena, beloved of Marcus, free to write her own story at last. But freedom, she was about to learn, came with a price higher than she had ever imagined. The palace clock tower struck midnight as Elena slipped out of her chambers for the last time. She wore a simple dark cloak over her plainest dress and carried only a small bag containing her most treasured possessions. Her heart was beating so fast, she wondered if everyone in the palace could hear it. The corridors were dimly lit by oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elena had walked these halls thousands of times, but tonight they felt different. Every step echoed with the weight of finality. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known for an uncertain future with the man she loved. As she made her way toward the gardens, Elena passed the portrait gallery where paintings of her ancestors hung in silent judgment. Kings and queens who had ruled for centuries, all watching her betray everything they had built. She forced herself not to look at their faces. The night air was cool against her skin as she stepped outside. Spring flowers filled the gardens with sweet scents, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was the kind of beautiful night that should have filled her with joy, but Elena felt only nervous anticipation. Marcus was already waiting in the greenhouse when she arrived. He had changed out of his guard uniform into the simple brown clothes of a traveling merchant. His few belongings were packed in a leather bag at his feet. When he saw Elena, his face lit up with a mixture of love and concern. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Once we leave tonight, there will be no going back. You'll give up everything, your title, your inheritance, your family. You'll never be a princess again." Elena looked into his dark eyes, seeing her own reflection there. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'd rather be a commoner with you than a princess without you." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you so much, Elena. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." They held each other in the moonlit greenhouse, surrounded by the ghostly shapes of sleeping plants. This was their moment of goodbye to the only life Elena had ever known, and their hello to an uncertain but hopeful future. "Tell me again about the merchant company," Elena whispered against Marcus's chest. "They trade in spices and silks with the eastern kingdoms," Marcus said softly. "The work involves traveling to distant ports, meeting interesting people, seeing new places. It's not a royal palace, but it's honest work, and it would let us build a life together." "It sounds perfect," Elena said. "I want to see the world beyond these walls. I want to meet people who don't know I'm a princess, who will judge me for who I am, rather than what I was born to be." Marcus stroked her hair. "You'll always be royalty to me, no matter what name we use or where we go." Elena smiled, feeling tears in her eyes. These were happy tears, tears of relief and excitement. After months of impossible longing, they were finally going to be together. But they weren't alone in the gardens that night. Victoria had positioned herself behind a large rose bush, about 30 feet from the greenhouse. She could see everything through the glass walls, and she had brought witnesses. 3 palace guards who were loyal to her waited in the shadows, along with Lady Margaret, one of Elena's ladies-in-waiting who had always resented the princess's privileged life. Victoria's heart raced with excitement as she watched the lovers embrace. This was even better than she had hoped. Not only was Elena meeting secretly with a commoner, but she was clearly planning to run away with him. The scandal would be enormous, and King Charles would be so humiliated and angry that he would need Victoria more than ever. But Victoria wanted to let the scene play out a little longer. The more evidence she gathered, the more devastating her revelation would be. Inside the greenhouse, Marcus and Elena were making their final preparations. They had gone over their escape plan dozens of times, but Marcus wanted to review it once more. "We'll leave through the servants' gate in the east wall," he said quietly. "My friend Thomas is waiting with a cart just outside the forest. He thinks we're eloping servants from another noble house. He'll take us to the port city of Millhaven, where we'll board a ship for the eastern kingdoms." Elena nodded. And our new names? You'll be Elena Rivers, my wife. I'll be Michael Rivers. We're simple merchants looking for opportunities in foreign markets. Elena Rivers, she repeated, testing the sound. I like it. It sounds like freedom. Marcus smiled. Are you ready, Mrs. Rivers? But before Elena could answer, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching the greenhouse. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with purpose. Marcus immediately stepped in front of Elena, his hand moving instinctively to where his sword would normally hang. But he wasn't wearing his guard uniform tonight, and he was unarmed. The greenhouse door burst open, and Victoria stepped inside, followed by the 3 guards and Lady Margaret. Oil lamps flickered in their hands, casting wild shadows on the glass walls. Well, well, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What do we have here? The Princess of Rosewood meeting secretly with a common guard in the middle of the night. How very interesting. Elena's blood turned to ice. She had been so careful, so cautious. How had Victoria discovered their secret? Lady Victoria, Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady, this isn't what it appears to be. Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the night air. Oh, I think it's exactly what it appears to be. A princess having an inappropriate relationship with a servant. Planning to run away together, perhaps. Marcus stepped forward. Leave the princess alone. If you have a problem with my conduct, take it up with me. One of the guards immediately pointed his sword at Marcus. Don't move, traitor. You're under arrest for compromising the royal family. Wait, Elena said desperately. Please, Lady Victoria, can we discuss this privately? There's no need to involve the guards. But Victoria was enjoying herself too much to stop now. She had waited months for this moment, and she intended to savor every second of Elena's downfall. Privately? Victoria asked. I'm afraid this matter is far too serious for privacy. The king must be informed immediately that his daughter has been conducting herself in a manner unbecoming of a princess. Elena felt tears starting to flow. Please, I'm begging you, don't do this. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to disgrace your family name, Victoria said coldly. Guards, arrest Captain Rivera. Lady Margaret, please escort the princess back to her chambers. She'll remain there until the king decides how to handle this situation. As the guards moved forward to seize Marcus, he and Elena shared one last look. In that moment, they both understood that their dreams of escape, of a life together, were over. I love you, Marcus said quietly. I love you too, Elena whispered back. Then the guards grabbed Marcus, binding his hands with rope. He didn't resist, knowing that any struggle would only make things worse for Elena. Lady Margaret took Elena's arm, not gently. Come along, Your Highness. His Majesty will want to see you first thing in the morning. As they led her away from the greenhouse, Elena looked back over her shoulder. Marcus was being marched toward the palace dungeons, his head held high despite his circumstances. Victoria stood in the greenhouse doorway, smiling triumphantly. You planned this, Elena said to Victoria as they walked. You've been watching us. Of course I planned this, Victoria replied smoothly. Did you really think you could carry on a secret affair under my nose without consequences? I've been protecting this family's reputation while you've been throwing yours away. This isn't about protecting anyone, Elena said angrily. This is about your jealousy and ambition. Victoria's mask of sweetness finally slipped. You have no idea what you're talking about, little girl. You've lived your entire life with everything handed to you on a silver platter. You have a title, wealth, power, and the love of a king, and you were willing to throw it all away for a common soldier. They had reached the palace, and Victoria paused at the main entrance. Some people, Victoria continued, have to fight for everything they achieve. Some people understand the value of position and security. But you You're nothing but a spoiled child who doesn't appreciate what she has." Elena stared at Victoria, finally understanding the depth of the woman's resentment. This wasn't just about Marcus, or even about Elena's refusal to marry Prince David. This was about years of Victoria feeling like an outsider in the palace, always the consort and never the queen, always second to a princess she saw as ungrateful and privileged. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elena said quietly, "but destroying my happiness won't bring you the security you're looking for." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. "We'll see about that." As they climbed the stairs toward Elena's chambers, the princess felt the weight of her situation settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. In a few hours, her father would learn about her secret relationship with Marcus. King Charles would be devastated, humiliated, and furious. Marcus would face charges of inappropriate conduct with a member of the royal family, which could result in exile or worse. Their dreams of escape, of building a new life together, were shattered. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Elena felt a spark of defiance. Victoria thought she had won, but Elena wasn't going to surrender without a fight. She was still a princess, still the daughter of a king, and she still had some power left to use. The question was, how could she use it to save the man she loved? Lady Margaret locked Elena in her chambers and stationed 2 guards outside the door. Elena was now a prisoner in her own home, waiting for dawn and the confrontation with her father that would determine her fate. She sat by her window, looking out at the gardens where she had found love and lost it in the same night. Somewhere in the palace dungeons, Marcus was probably sitting in a cold cell, wondering if he would ever see sunlight again. Elena touched the letter in her pocket, the one Marcus had written her weeks ago professing his love. She had planned to keep it forever as a reminder of the happiest time in her life. Now it might be the only thing she had left of him. As the hours passed toward dawn, Elena began to form a plan. It was desperate and dangerous, but it might be her only chance to save Marcus and preserve some shred of dignity for both of them. If Victoria wanted a scandal that would shock the kingdom, Elena would give her one. But it wouldn't be the scandal Victoria was expecting. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Victoria was having trouble sleeping despite her triumph. She had achieved everything she had hoped for. Elena was disgraced, Marcus was imprisoned, and King Charles would soon need her support more than ever. So why did she feel so empty? She tried to tell herself it was just the excitement of victory, that the hollow feeling in her chest would pass. But deep down, Victoria knew the truth. Destroying Elena's happiness hadn't brought her the satisfaction she had expected. If anything, it had made her feel smaller and more bitter than before. But it was too late for regrets now. The wheels of scandal were in motion, and by morning, the entire palace would know about Princess Elena's forbidden love affair. Victoria had made sure of that by speaking to key servants and guards before returning to her chambers. By dawn, everyone from the kitchen maids to the stable boys would be whispering about how the princess had fallen in love with a common soldier and tried to run away with him. The story would spread beyond the palace walls within hours, reaching every corner of the kingdom. King Charles would have no choice but to take decisive action to preserve the royal family's reputation. Elena would probably be sent to a convent, and Marcus would face exile or imprisonment. Victoria's position as the king's consort would be more secure than ever. In his grief and embarrassment, Charles would turn to her for comfort and support. Marriage would surely follow. It was everything Victoria had wanted, so why did victory taste so bitter? As the first light of dawn crept through the palace windows, 3 lives hung in the balance. Elena, imprisoned in her chambers, was preparing to make a desperate gamble to save the man she loved. Marcus, locked in the dungeons, was wondering if he would ever see Elena again. And Victoria, lying sleepless in her grand bed, was discovering that revenge was a hollow prize. None of them could have imagined how the coming day would unfold, or how one night of betrayal would change the entire kingdom forever. The palace bells rang 6 times, announcing the dawn of what would become known throughout the kingdom as the Day of Broken Crowns. Before the sun set again, the royal family of Rosewood would be torn apart, alliances would shift, and the very foundations of the monarchy would be shaken. Helena had loved Marcus enough to give up her throne. Now she would have to discover if she loved him enough to fight for his life, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. The real battle was just beginning. The throne room had never felt more intimidating to Helena than it did that morning. The vast chamber with its soaring ceiling and marble columns seemed designed to make anyone standing before the throne feel small and powerless. King Charles sat on the golden throne that had belonged to his ancestors for 3 centuries, his face carved from stone, his eyes burning with disappointment and rage. Helena stood before him in the same simple dress she had worn the night before, flanked by 2 guards. Her hands were bound, not with rope like a common criminal, but with silk cords that reminded everyone present that she was still a princess, even in disgrace. Victoria stood to the right of the throne, wearing her most expensive gown and her most sorrowful expression. She had perfected the look of a loyal supporter devastated by the royal family's shame. Behind her stood several nobles and advisors, all wearing carefully neutral faces that hid their excitement at witnessing such a dramatic scandal. Master Thomas, the elderly advisor who had tutored Helena since childhood, stood near the back of the room. His kind face was creased with worry, and Helena could see that he had been crying. The sight of his distress nearly broke her resolve, but she forced herself to remain strong. "Princess Helena," King Charles began, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I have been informed of your shameful conduct. Before I pass judgment, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Helena lifted her chin, meeting her father's eyes directly. "I have nothing to defend, Your Majesty. I fell in love with a good man who treated me with respect and kindness. If that is shameful, then I am proud to bear the shame." A murmur rippled through the assembled court. Helena's defiant words were not what anyone had expected from a disgraced princess begging for forgiveness. King Charles's face darkened further. "You speak of love as if it excuses betraying your duty to your family and your kingdom. You were born to privilege, Helena, but that privilege comes with responsibilities. You cannot simply cast aside centuries of tradition because of your feelings for a commoner." "Can I not?" Helena asked. "Since when do the laws of the kingdom govern matters of the heart? Show me the statute that says a princess cannot choose her own happiness." Victoria stepped forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps the princess doesn't understand the full consequences of her actions. The scandal has already begun to spread throughout the palace. If word reaches the neighboring kingdoms that Princess Helena was involved with a guard, it could damage important diplomatic relationships." Helena turned to face Victoria, her eyes flashing. "And whose fault is that? Who made sure the scandal would spread? Who brought witnesses to a private moment? You orchestrated this entire scene for your own purposes, Lady Victoria." "How dare you accuse me of—" Victoria began, but Helena cut her off. "How dare I speak the truth? You've been watching Marcus and me for months, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy us. This isn't about protecting the royal family's reputation. This is about eliminating any obstacles to your own ambitions." The court was now buzzing with whispers. The accusation against Victoria was explosive, and everyone present understood its implications. King Charles raised his hand for silence. "Enough. Helena, your behavior is making this situation worse. Lady Victoria has served this family loyally for 3 years. She discovered your inappropriate relationship and reported it, as was her duty." "Her duty?" Helena laughed bitterly. "Father, can't you see what she's doing? She wants you to be so grateful for her loyalty that you'll marry her and make her queen. My disgrace serves her purposes perfectly." Victoria's carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. But she recovered quickly. "Your Majesty," Victoria said in a hurt voice, "I'm deeply wounded that the princess would question my motives at such a difficult time. I've only ever wanted what's best for this family." Elena saw her opening and took it. "If you truly want what's best for this family, then answer me this. Why did you wait until the night Marcus and I were planning to leave? If you were really concerned about the family's reputation, wouldn't you have reported our relationship months ago?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Victoria's face went pale as she realized the trap Elena had set for her. I needed to be certain of what I was seeing," Victoria stammered. "I couldn't make accusations without proof." "Or," Elena said loudly, "you waited because you wanted to catch us in the most compromising situation possible. You wanted maximum scandal to ensure maximum damage to my reputation and maximum gratitude from my father." King Charles looked back and forth between Elena and Victoria, his expression troubled. For the first time since the confrontation began, doubt flickered in his eyes. Elena pressed her advantage. "Father, ask yourself this. If Lady Victoria was truly concerned about my welfare and our family's honor, why didn't she come to you privately when she first suspected something? Why did she bring guards and witnesses to what should have been a family matter?" The murmurs in the court grew louder. Several nobles were nodding, clearly finding Elena's logic compelling. Victoria realized she was losing control of the narrative. "Your Majesty, the princess is trying to shift blame away from her own misconduct. The fact remains that she was conducting an inappropriate relationship and planning to abandon her duties to the kingdom." "Yes," Elena said firmly, "I was planning to abandon my duties, and I still am." The court fell silent. Even King Charles looked shocked. Elena reached into her dress and pulled out a piece of parchment that she had hidden there. "This is a formal letter of abdication. I, Princess Elena of Rosewood, hereby renounce my claim to the throne and all privileges of royal birth. I choose to become a commoner, free to marry whom I choose and live as I see fit." The letter was a forgery, of course. Elena had written it in her chambers during the long hours before dawn, using all her knowledge of legal language to make it sound official. But the assembled court didn't know that, and the dramatic gesture had exactly the effect she had hoped for. King Charles rose from his throne. "Elena, you cannot be serious. You would give up everything for this man?" "I would give up anything for love, father." "Including a crown that has never brought me happiness." Elena turned to address the entire court. "I have lived my entire life being told what to do, whom to marry, how to behave. I have been a dutiful daughter and a responsible princess, but I have never been allowed to be myself. Today, I choose to be Elena, not your highness. I choose love over duty, happiness over obligation." She looked directly at her father. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I cannot live my life for your approval or anyone else's. If being true to myself means giving up my title, then so be it." Master Thomas stepped forward from the back of the room. "Your Majesty, if I may speak?" King Charles nodded, though he looked confused and overwhelmed. The elderly advisor's voice was gentle but firm. "I have known Princess Elena since she was 5 years old. I have watched her grow from a curious child into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman. She has always put the needs of others before her own, always done what was expected of her." He paused, looking around the room. "If Princess Elena believes that Captain Rivera is worth such a sacrifice, then perhaps we should consider that her judgment might be better than our assumptions." Victoria stepped forward angrily. "Master Thomas, you cannot seriously be suggesting that we allow this to continue. The captain is a commoner, a soldier with no family connections or political value. This union would bring nothing to the kingdom. "And what has the prospect of marriage to Prince David brought?" Master Thomas asked mildly. "A princess who grows more unhappy with each passing day? Political alliances built on misery rarely last." Lady Victoria. The debate was spiraling beyond Victoria's control. She had expected Elena to be broken by the exposure of her secret, not defiant and articulate. She had expected King Charles to be grateful for her intervention, not questioning her motives. But Elena wasn't finished. She had one more card to play, the most dangerous one of all. "Father," she said quietly, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll answer me honestly. When you married my mother, did you love her?" The question was deeply personal, almost inappropriate in such a public setting. King Charles's face softened for the first time that day. "Yes," he said simply. "I loved her very much." "And were you happy together?" "We were very happy, Elena. Your mother was the light of my life." Elena nodded. "Then you understand what I'm fighting for. You understand why I would risk everything for the chance to have what you and Mother had." King Charles was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Your mother and I were fortunate, Elena. We were arranged to marry for political reasons, but we found love together. That doesn't always happen." "No," Elena agreed. "It doesn't always happen. But when it does happen, isn't it worth protecting? Isn't it worth fighting for?" The court was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word of the conversation between father and daughter. King Charles looked at Elena, really looked at her, for the first time in the confrontation. He saw not just a disobedient princess, but a young woman fighting for her right to choose her own destiny. "Even if I were to allow this," he said slowly, "the political consequences would be severe. Prince David's kingdom would be insulted. Other nobles would question the stability of our royal line. There would be rumors and scandal for years." Elena took a step closer to the throne. "Father, what good are political alliances if they're built on lies? What kind of stability comes from forcing people into marriages they don't want? You have ruled wisely for 25 years, not because you married for politics, but because you and Mother built a partnership based on love and respect." She gestured toward Victoria. "Look what happens when people pursue power without love. Lady Victoria has spent 3 years trying to manipulate her way to a crown, and what has it brought her? Bitterness, jealousy, and the kind of cruelty we witnessed last night." Victoria's face was now bright red with rage. "How dare you—" "Silence," King Charles commanded, and Victoria fell quiet immediately. The king stood up and walked down the steps from his throne, stopping directly in front of Elena. For a moment, father and daughter looked at each other without the barriers of protocol and politics. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" he asked quietly. "If you choose Captain Rivera, you'll be giving up more than just a title. You'll be giving up the life you've always known, the privileges you've grown up with, the security of royal protection." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her all day. "Father, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." King Charles studied her face, seeing in her expression the same determination he had once seen in her mother's eyes. "Very well," he said finally, "but there will be conditions." The court erupted in shocked whispers, but King Charles held up his hand for silence. "If Princess Elena chooses to renounce her royal status, she may do so. However, Captain Rivera will face a trial to determine if he conducted himself honorably in this affair. If he is found guilty of taking advantage of his position or compromising the princess through manipulation or coercion, he will face the full consequences of the law." Elena's heart raced. This wasn't the unconditional victory she had hoped for, but it was better than she had expected. "And if he is found innocent?" she asked. "If he is found innocent of wrongdoing, and if you still wish to renounce your title, then you will be free to marry him as a commoner. You will receive no inheritance, no royal protection, and no financial support from the crown. You will truly be on your own." Elena nodded immediately. "I accept those conditions." Victoria could no longer contain herself. "Your Majesty, this is madness. You cannot seriously be considering allowing the princess to throw away her birthright for a common soldier." King Charles turned to face Victoria, and for the first time Elena saw her father look at his consort with something approaching distaste. "Lady Victoria," he said coldly, "your concern for the royal family's reputation is noted. However, I am beginning to wonder if your concerns are entirely selfless." Victoria's face went white. "I don't understand what you mean, Your Majesty." "Don't you? My daughter has accused you of orchestrating this entire scandal for your own benefit. She has suggested that you've been manipulating events to serve your own ambitions. What do you say to these accusations?" Victoria looked around the room desperately, seeing her support crumbling. "Your Majesty, I have only ever acted in the best interests of your family. If my methods seemed harsh, it was only because I felt the situation required decisive action." "Decisive action?" King Charles repeated slowly. "Or calculated manipulation?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Victoria realized that her grand plan had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly. Instead of securing her position as the future queen, she had revealed her true nature to the king and the court. Elena watched Victoria's downfall with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. The woman had destroyed herself through her own greed and jealousy. "Master Thomas," King Charles said, turning to his old advisor, "please arrange for Captain Rivera to be brought from the dungeons. He will have the opportunity to speak in his own defense before the trial begins." As the court began to disperse, Elena felt a mixture of hope and terror. She had won the right to fight for her love, but the battle was far from over. Marcus still faced trial, and there was no guarantee that the court would find him innocent. But for the first time since Victoria's trap had been sprung, Elena felt like she had some control over her own destiny. An hour later, Marcus was brought into a smaller chamber where Elena was waiting with her father and Master Thomas. He looked tired and worried, but his eyes lit up when he saw Elena. "Are you all right?" were his first words, directed at Elena rather than the king. King Charles observed this exchange with interest. A man primarily concerned with his own welfare would have focused on defending himself to the king. Marcus's immediate concern for Elena's well-being spoke well of his character. "Captain Rivera," King Charles said formally, "you stand accused of conducting an inappropriate relationship with Princess Elena and of attempting to convince her to abandon her royal duties. How do you answer these charges?" Marcus stood straight, meeting the king's gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I am guilty of falling in love with your daughter. I am guilty of meeting with her in secret and of accepting her feelings for me. If those things constitute crimes, then I am a criminal. And the charge that you manipulated or coerced the princess? Never," Marcus said firmly. "Princess Elena made her own choices. I tried several times to convince her that our relationship was impossible, that she should marry someone of appropriate station. She refused to accept that advice." Elena stepped forward. "Father, I need you to know that everything Marcus says is true. He never pressured me or tried to manipulate me. If anything, he tried to protect me from the consequences of loving him." King Charles studied Marcus carefully. "Captain, what did you hope to gain from this relationship? Surely you understood that loving a princess could only bring you trouble." Marcus's answer was simple and direct. "I hope to gain nothing, Your Majesty, except the happiness of loving and being loved by the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I never wanted Princess Elena to give up her title or her life for me. I was prepared to leave the kingdom alone to spare her the pain of an impossible situation. Then why didn't you? Because, Marcus said, glancing at Elena with infinite tenderness, she convinced me that love is worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. King Charles was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Finally, he made his decision. Captain Rivera, you will face a formal trial in 3 days. The charges against you are serious, and the court will determine your guilt or innocence. However, based on what I have heard today, I am inclined to believe that your conduct, while inappropriate, was not criminal. He turned to Elena. My daughter, you have 3 days to reconsider your decision. If Captain Rivera is found innocent, and if you still wish to renounce your title, I will allow it. But think carefully about what you're giving up. Elena hugged her father, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving us a chance. King Charles held his daughter tightly. I'm doing this because I love you, Elena. I want you to be happy, even if your path to happiness is not what I would have chosen for you. 3 days later, Marcus was acquitted of all criminal charges. The court found that while his relationship with Elena was inappropriate, it was based on genuine affection and respect, not manipulation or coercion. That same afternoon, Princess Elena of Rosewood formally renounced her royal title in a ceremony that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She signed the legal documents that stripped her of her inheritance and her position in the line of succession. King Charles placed his hand on his daughter's head one last time. You will always be my daughter, Elena, no matter what title you choose to bear. Elena and Marcus were married the next day in a simple ceremony in the palace chapel. Master Thomas performed the service, and King Charles walked Elena down the aisle, giving her away to the man she had chosen. Victoria, meanwhile, had fallen from grace as completely as Elena had risen in her father's estimation. The king dismissed her from court within a week, sending her back to her family in disgrace. Her dreams of becoming queen died with her reputation. Elena and Marcus left Rosewood Palace the morning after their wedding, traveling east toward the merchant ports where they would begin their new life together. Elena wore a simple traveling dress and carried only a small bag of belongings. She had given up a kingdom, but she had gained something far more precious. As their carriage rolled away from the only home Elena had ever known, she took Marcus's hand and smiled. Any regrets? He asked softly. Elena looked back at the palace one last time, then turned to face the road ahead. None at all. I chose love over a crown, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Behind them, King Charles stood at his window, watching his daughter disappear into her new life. He would miss her terribly, but he was proud of her courage in choosing happiness over duty. The palace would never be quite the same without Princess Elena's laughter echoing through the halls. But love, the king had learned, was sometimes worth any sacrifice, even a crown.